I never expected the room to be that full. When I pushed open the door to the bankruptcy courtroom, clutching the folder that felt heavier than my entire future, the last thing I thought I'd see was my entire family sitting together in the first 3 rows. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but when they all turned around, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who used to pat my head at family gatherings, I felt my stomach twist. Some looked curious, some looked disappointed, and a few looked almost excited, as if they were watching the opening act of a show they'd been waiting years to see. I could feel the embarrassment burn through me, the kind that makes you want to disappear into the floor. I tried to swallow my pride and keep walking, but I could feel their eyes on me judging me. Some whispered. Some shook their heads. And in that moment, even though the judge hadn't said a single word yet, I already felt sentenced. I sat down at the defendant's table with shaking hands, wondering how everything had collapsed so fast. 15 years earlier they celebrated my biggest wins. They cheered when I opened my first business, told everyone how gifted I was, how I was going to be the one who would finally make the family proud. But the moment things went wrong, the support disappeared like smoke. It was as if failure stripped me of my place in the family, and now they were here to watch the final piece of my pride fall apart. When I glanced at my mother, she looked away, pretending she didn't see me. My father didn't even blink. And the worst part was knowing that none of them came to support me. They came to witness the spectacle. I remember thinking, is this what I've become to them? A show? A warning? A joke? The bailiff's voice echoed and the hearing began. With each detail of my debts being read aloud, with each number that confirmed how far I had fallen, I could feel the weight of their stares. It felt like they were feeding off my humiliation, and I couldn't do anything but sit there quietly, trying to keep my voice from cracking whenever I had to answer a question. I walked out that day feeling empty. Not just broke, but stripped. Something inside me hardened, not out of anger, but out of awakening. I didn't know how long it would take or how many years I would spend rebuilding brick by brick, but I promised myself that if I ever rose again, I would do it without needing a single hand from the people who sat there and watched me sink. I didn't know then that it would take 15 long years, years filled with struggle, rebuilding, doubt, small victories, and moments when giving up felt easier than breathing. But I kept pushing, because something in me refused to let that courtroom be the final chapter of my story. Back then, I had no idea how deep the betrayal from some family members ran. I didn't know that a few of them had whispered behind my back long before the bankruptcy, predicting my failure. I didn't know that some had even placed bets, literal bets, on how long it would take before everything collapsed. I didn't know how much jealousy was hiding behind smiles at family gatherings, or how many people were secretly waiting for the day they could say, "See? I told you he wasn't going anywhere." But life has a way of revealing who people really are, especially when you're at your lowest. And for me, those revelations came slowly, piece by piece, over the years that followed. The first few years after the bankruptcy were some of the hardest. I worked jobs I never imagined I'd take. I stayed quiet when customers spoke to me rudely. I swallowed pride more times than I can count. But in those moments, something surprising happened. The more I stopped trying to prove myself to anyone, the more I started understanding who I truly was. I rebuilt my confidence from the ground up, not from praise but from perseverance. Not from applause but from consistency. I learned how to survive without the comfort of validation. And somewhere in the middle of all that struggle, I realized I didn't miss the people who left me in that courtroom. In fact, their absence made more space for the people who actually cared. And slowly, things started to change. My new business didn't explode overnight. It didn't go viral. It didn't attract crowds. But it grew steadily. 1 client, then 5, then 10, then a small contract, then a bigger one. Each small win felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My life wasn't glamorous. I wasn't rich. But I was moving again. And that alone felt like victory. As the years passed, the business expanded. Opportunities came that I once thought were impossible. I kept my circle small, quiet, and loyal. I never bragged. I never rushed to tell anyone, especially not my family. I learned early that some people don't deserve front row seats to your success if they only showed up for your failures. But life has a strange sense of timing. Because 15 years after they watched me hit rock bottom, an invitation arrived in the mail, one I wasn't expecting. A family event. A celebration. And along with it came whispers from relatives. You should come. People have been talking about you. They've heard about your success. They're curious. They want to see you again. I laughed when I read those messages. Curious? Oh, now they were curious. Now that I was someone worth talking about again. Now that silence had turned into rumors, and rumors had turned into admiration. For a moment, I debated not going at all. Why return to people who disappeared when I needed them the most? Why walk into a room filled with faces that once looked at me with disappointment and satisfaction instead of love? I almost threw the invitation away. But something inside me stopped my hand. Not revenge. Not bitterness. But something else, closure. A chance to walk back into a place where I once felt small and show them without saying a word that I didn't break. That their expectations weren't my destiny. That the person they counted out had risen, not because of them but in spite of them. So I decided to go. I arrived 15 years later, not the same person who left that bankruptcy hearing with shame burning in his chest, but someone who had rebuilt quietly, intentionally, and far from their eyes. And as I walked through the doors of that family gathering, the room went silent. Faces paused. Eyes widened. People who once avoided me suddenly hurried forward. They wanted to shake my hand. They wanted to ask questions. They wanted to pretend the past didn't happen. But the real moment, the one that I will never forget, came when I saw the same group of family members who sat front row at my lowest moment, now standing together again. And the second they saw me walk toward them, everything changed. Before I could even open my mouth, one of them stepped forward and said something I never expected to hear. But what they said, that's where the real story begins. The moment that cousin stepped forward, the air in the room shifted, almost like everyone collectively inhaled and forgot how to exhale. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was something in between, an awkward mix of guilt, curiosity, and a strange kind of hesitation that made it hard to read what he was truly thinking. I stood there quietly, not rushing, not reacting, just letting the tension unfold on its own. People around us murmured softly, pretending to talk about other things while clearly listening to every breath between us. He cleared his throat, glanced at the others standing behind him, then looked back at me. More family members slowly turned toward us, waiting, leaning in without looking like they were leaning in. I could feel all those familiar eyes again, the same eyes that watched me crumble 15 years earlier, now watching to see how I would respond. But before he said anything, I found myself drifting back into memories of how everything even led to that bankruptcy hearing in the first place. A lot of people assumed I just mismanaged money or made reckless decisions. They had their stories, their gossip, their versions of what happened. But the truth was a lot more complicated. It always is. Back then, when I launched my first business, things were going well at first. I was young, ambitious, excited, and a little naive. I trusted easily. I believed people meant what they said. I thought my family supported me because they saw something in me. Maybe they did for a while. But looking back, it's clear that some of them supported me only as long as my success made them look good. The moment it stopped benefiting them, the support faded. Some even took advantage of my trust. Small things at first, favors they didn't return, promises they didn't keep. Back then I didn't see it. I thought I was just helping family. I didn't realize I was being used. And the business itself, I poured everything into it. Time, energy, savings, pride. The work was good, but the people around me weren't always good. One of the biggest setbacks came when I partnered with someone I believed was loyal. He was almost like a brother to me, someone who came to our house every holiday, someone my parents trusted, someone my relatives always praised. I thought working with him would bring the business to another level. Instead, it opened doors I couldn't close later. He mishandled money, made deals without my permission, and created messes I had to clean up. When things fell apart, he quietly stepped away and let me take the blame. And the family, instead of asking questions, simply assumed I was the one who ruined everything. I remembered all those arguments behind closed doors, the shouting, the frustration, the days I couldn't sleep because I felt everything collapsing but didn't know where to run. I remembered how people who once admired me suddenly started keeping their distance. It was strange how quickly admiration could turn into disappointment, and disappointment into judgment. But what hurt the most wasn't the business failing. It was how easily my family accepted the worst version of the story. How they didn't even try to see the pressure I was under. How they didn't consider how hard I had tried. How not a single one of them asked me if I was okay. Not once. I think that was the first time I learned that some people don't see your struggles unless your pain benefits them. And for some in my family, my downfall became a story they could pass around like a plate of snacks during tea time. As the years passed after the bankruptcy, I avoided big family gatherings. It wasn't out of bitterness, it was out of self-preservation. I didn't want to spend time around people who reminded me of my lowest point. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. The early days were rough, filled with long hours, second jobs, side hustles, and moments of doubt. But something inside me grew stronger with each setback. I learned how to be patient, how to stay grounded, how to trust myself again. During those years, I also learned something interesting. Some relatives actually reached out quietly, not to gossip or ask questions but to offer genuine support. Not all of them were part of the front row audience during that hearing. A few checked on me, encouraged me, and tried to lift me up. But their voices were drowned out by the louder ones. The critics, the dramatizers, the ones who repeated my struggles as if repeating them made them more real. Still, I never let myself become bitter. I believe life teaches people in different ways, and my lesson came through silence and distance. I realized that it wasn't my job to change anyone's perception of me. My only job was to become someone I could respect again. That's the ironic part. When you stop trying to prove yourself to others, you start proving yourself to the only person who truly matters, you. And that was how my life slowly started shifting in a better direction. Now, standing in front of my family 15 years later, all those memories rushed through me like a quiet storm. I looked at the faces staring back, faces older now, some changed, some exactly the same. The cousin who stepped forward finally spoke, his voice low but heavy with meaning. "We didn't think you would come," he said. Just those words. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just a simple statement wrapped in layers of hidden emotions. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to understand what he meant, what he expected me to say. People nearby grew quiet, pretending to check their phones or adjust their clothes while listening to the tension building between us. His eyes softened slightly. "A lot has changed since then," he continued. "More than you think." There was something in his tone, an uneasiness, a hesitation, that caught my attention. Something he wasn't saying. Something he was struggling to express. I looked at him closely, trying to read what was happening behind his words. But before I could, someone else joined the group. Another relative. Then another. Soon, there were 6 or 7 of them surrounding me, forming a small circle in the middle of the room. It didn't feel hostile. But it didn't feel warm either. It felt cautious. As if they needed something from me but didn't know how to ask. As if there was a story behind their eyes that I wasn't aware of. As if the past 15 years had been far more eventful for them than I realized. My cousin opened his mouth again, ready to say something else, but he stopped. Another relative gently touched his arm, signaling him to wait. They exchanged a silent look, the kind only family members who share secrets can understand. And that was when I felt it. There was something they all knew, something they hadn't told me yet. Something important. Something that involved me. The cousin took a slow breath, looked around at the others, then looked back at me. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "But not here. Not where everyone can listen." He glanced over his shoulder at the room full of relatives who were pretending not to watch us. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There's something you don't know, something that happened after you left. And you deserve to hear it." But before he could continue, someone across the room called my name loudly. Everyone turned. And when I saw who it was, my heart stopped. It was my father. The same man who sat stone-faced at my bankruptcy hearing, the same man who walked past me that day without a single word, was now calling my name across the room with a voice that carried more force than I'd heard from him in years. Every conversation in the room paused. Every head turned. Even the relatives who had gathered around me stepped back slightly, as if they didn't want to stand between us. For a moment, I wasn't sure if he was calling me out, or calling me over. He made his way toward me slowly, each step firm but heavy, like he was carrying years of unspoken things on his shoulders. His hair was more gray than I remembered. His posture wasn't as straight as it used to be. But his eyes, those familiar sharp eyes, were exactly the same. They held something I couldn't decode. Not anger. Not warmth. Something in the middle. Something unreadable. I felt the room tighten. Conversations resumed only in whispers. My cousin stepped aside, giving space, though I could feel the tension between him and my father from how his jaw clenched. There was a story there too. Something unspoken. My father stopped a few feet in front of me, studying me with the kind of stare he used to give when I was a kid, and he was trying to decide whether to scold me or hug me. The silence stretched, and just as I opened my mouth to say something, anything, he beat me to it. "You came," he said. 2 words. Simple. But they hit harder than I expected. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to say, "Why wouldn't I?" But another part of me wanted to throw back, "Where were you when I needed you?" Instead, the words stuck in my throat. Before I could answer, he looked past me, his gaze landing on the group of relatives who had been talking to me earlier. His eyes narrowed slightly. The entire energy shifted. My cousin shifted uncomfortably, and without saying anything, he gave me a look that basically said, "We'll talk later." But later didn't come right away. My father gently touched my elbow, a gesture so unexpected I froze. He didn't grip me or drag me, just guided me toward the side of the room, away from listening ears. People watched us with curiosity, jealousy, confusion, everyone trying to guess what conversation was about to happen. It felt strange being the center of attention again, but this time for reasons no one fully understood yet. When we reached the corner, he let out a long breath, the kind that comes from holding something in for too long. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he looked at the floor like he was searching for the right words or maybe trying to calm himself. "There are things you need to know," he finally said. "Things that happened after you left. Things we didn't tell you because, well, there were many reasons." The way he said it made me feel a strange mix of concern and suspicion. I could tell this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. This wasn't just about old resentments or misunderstandings. This was something deeper. Before I could ask what he meant, someone else approached us. My mother. Her presence shifted everything again. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Not disappointment. Not anger. It was something softer, but also heavier. As if she had been carrying a weight on her heart for too long. "I told him to wait," she said quietly to my father. Then she looked at me. "But maybe it's better we talk now. Before things get more complicated." More complicated? The night already felt like a maze. She took a small step closer. "There's a reason your cousin stopped you earlier. There's a reason they want to talk to you privately. And there's a reason we called your name." The tension in my chest tightened. "What reason?" I asked. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a sudden burst of laughter erupted from the other side of the room, breaking the moment. A group of relatives glanced our way again, clearly noticing the gravity of our conversation. My mother sighed, lowering her voice even further. "Not everyone here knows," she whispered. "And we don't want them overhearing. It would cause problems." That word problems hung in the air like a cloud. My father rubbed his forehead. "Your cousin isn't the one who should tell you. We should. But once you hear it, things won't feel the same." That uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was the unsettling sense that something much bigger than old family tension was hiding just beneath the surface. My mother finally spoke again, slower this time. "After your bankruptcy, our family didn't stay united. Not the way you think. There were fights, arguments, people choosing sides. Secrets kept to avoid more damage." I blinked. "Because of me?" She nodded. "Partly. But not in the way you imagine." I wanted to ask what that meant, but before I could, another cousin approached, this time one who rarely talked to me even before everything happened. His face was stiff, nervous. He pulled my father aside and whispered something quickly. My father's expression changed instantly, like someone had just delivered news he didn't want to hear. My mother exhaled deeply. "It's happening faster than we expected," she murmured. "We thought we had more time." Time for what? My heart pounded harder. My father returned to us with a tense look, glancing around the room as if searching for someone, or maybe watching out for someone. He looked at me directly. "You're going to hear things tonight. People are going to approach you. Some will ask questions. Some will pretend to be friendly. Some will bring up the past." That sounded like a warning, not advice. "What exactly is going on?" I asked, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. He hesitated, then lowered his tone. "There are documents, agreements, mistakes people made. Things they thought you'd never come back to discover." My mother added, "And some of those things are connected to your downfall, more than you know." The room around us felt suddenly colder. The noise, the chatter, the laughter, it all faded into a kind of distant hum. My head was spinning. So this wasn't just about old grudges. It wasn't only about family members who enjoyed watching me fail. Something deeper, something hidden, had been happening all along. I tried to steady my breathing. "Are you saying people in the family were involved in what happened to me?" Silence. Not denial. Not explanation. Just silence. Which honestly said more than words could. Before either of them could respond, a new voice called out from behind us, calm, steady, and serious. When I turned around, another relative walked toward us. One who was rarely around but always acted like he knew more than everyone else. And the look on his face made it clear he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He stopped in front of me and said quietly, "They won't tell you everything. Not yet. But I will. And you need to hear it before anyone else gets to you." My parents stiffened. My mother whispered, "Not here, please, not here." But he didn't step back. He looked me dead in the eyes. "You've been kept in the dark long enough. And if you don't hear the truth now, You're going to walk straight into the same trap twice. The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet, too tense. I swallowed hard. And then he said something that froze me completely. It wasn't just your partner who caused your downfall. Someone in this family did too, and you're standing in the same room with them right now. Before I could react, before I could even process his words, the lights in the hall flickered. Just once, but enough to make everyone look up. And when they came back on, the person he was looking at had already slipped away into the crowd. The lights flickering should have been nothing more than a small glitch in an overcrowded hall, but the way everyone's heads snapped upward at the same time made it feel like the moment had been waiting to happen. When the lights steadied again, the relative who was being silently accused, whoever they were, had already blended back into the sea of moving bodies. I scanned the crowd, but all I saw were polite smiles, fake conversations, and people pretending they weren't watching me like I was the main event again. The man who had confronted me leaned toward my ear. They knew I was about to expose them, he whispered. They won't leave easily tonight. But they won't come forward either. Not until they know what you know. His words made my skin crawl. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused, overwhelmed, unsure who I could even trust. My parents exchanged a look, one heavy with fear rather than guilt, as if they were terrified of this entire situation spiraling out of control. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, steady but trembling ever so slightly. We need to go somewhere quieter. There's too much happening here. But before we could move, someone else approached us. An aunt who had always been especially sharp-tongued, the kind who loved family drama more than family unity. She smiled too widely, her voice too sweet to be real. There you are, she said, her eyes flickering between us. Everyone's been talking about you. You really surprised us by coming tonight. The way she emphasized, everyone, felt like a small warning wrapped inside a compliment. She leaned closer to me, lowering her voice as if she was doing me a favor. You might want to be careful who you let pull you aside tonight. Not everyone has your best interests in mind. Some people are nervous. My father stiffened. My mother subtly positioned herself between us and the aunt. The man who warned me frowned deeply. This wasn't a conversation. This was a message. And it was clear she knew more than she was saying. Before I could respond, she gave me a quick pat on the arm and drifted away, greeting others with that same too sweet smile, leaving us all standing there more unsettled than before. My father whispered urgently, "This is getting out of hand." But the man who claimed someone in the family caused my downfall shook his head. It was always going to happen the moment he walked back in here. They're panicking. Panicking about what? I felt like every familiar face around me had turned into a stranger's. Relatives I grew up with, people who used to ruffle my hair when I was younger, people who held my hands at weddings and hugged me at funerals. They all felt like characters in a story I didn't fully understand. The crowd had shifted again. People were looking at me not directly but in that sideways glance way, like they were checking how much I knew already. I tugged my father's sleeve. "Tell me now," I said, my voice unsteady. "What are all of you hiding from me?" He looked at my mother again, their silent exchange full of worry. My mother spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not one thing. It's many things. And you walking away 15 years ago, it didn't end the tension. It exposed it." I blinked. Exposed what? Her eyes softened with regret. The cracks. I wanted to ask more, but suddenly a loud voice echoed through the room, calling for everyone to gather for a family toast. The announcement cut through every individual conversation, forcing everyone to move toward the center area. Glasses clinked, people shuffled, the energy tightening into one collective moment. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the person standing at the far end of the room, someone I hadn't seen all night, someone whose absence had been unusually noticeable. My former business partner. Not the cousin, not the aunt, not any of the relatives who had been acting strangely. It was him. The man whose bad decisions and silent betrayals had been the first domino in my collapse 15 years ago. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. I didn't know he would be here. I didn't even know he still had ties with the family. But there he was, standing next to two relatives who had avoided eye contact with me from the moment I walked in. My heart started pounding again, harder this time. Everything inside me tightened. The room around me blurred as every memory I tried to bury suddenly resurfaced. His laughter, his promises, the trust one gave him, and the silence he left me with when things crashed. He lifted his glass slightly, acknowledging my presence with the faintest nod. Not friendly. Not apologetic. Just aware. My father saw where I was looking. His face drained of color. "That's what we didn't expect tonight," he whispered shakily. "We didn't think he would come. My mother clutched my arm. Please don't approach him yet. Not now. Not before you hear everything. But the man who had been warning me earlier shook his head urgently. This changes everything. If he's here, then the others will make their move soon. They won't wait. What move? I demanded. What are you all talking about? The toast began, the voice at the microphone growing louder, the clinking of glasses rising, but all I could focus on was my former partner slowly weaving through the crowd toward the exit doors. He didn't look back again. He didn't rush. But the purposeful movement was enough to make my pulse spike. Is he the one who caused my downfall? I asked, barely breathing. My father closed his eyes, as if he wished he could erase the entire situation. He wasn't the only one, he finally said. And he wasn't even the one who started it. The room tilted slightly in my vision. Then who? My mother's hand trembled as she touched my arm again. We're trying to protect you. Protect me from who? I whispered sharply. She hesitated, her lips parting, her guilt rising to the surface. And that was when the warning man answered for her. Someone you never suspected, he said. Someone close. Someone who smiled at you the whole time. Someone who walked into that courtroom 15 years ago pretending they were just there to watch. My chest tightened, breaths growing shorter, the edges of the room buzzing with heat and noise. My father stepped closer to me, voice low and desperate. We will explain everything. But you need to understand, once you hear the truth, things in this family can never go back to normal. But before I could reply, before I could even decide whether to stay or follow my former partner out the door, the microphone screeched loudly. Everyone winced. The sound pierced through the air, and then the announcer's voice crackled out. Can we have everyone's attention, please? We have an unexpected issue. People murmured, confused. The man on stage took a deep breath, steadying himself, then looked straight at me. It seems there's been a misunderstanding involving one of our guests. We need the person involved to step forward. My heart slammed against my ribs. The room stilled. People turned toward me again, slowly, intentionally. The man on stage raised his voice louder this time. It concerns the events that happened 15 years ago, and the documents that recently resurfaced. And when I saw who everyone was staring at, my legs nearly gave out. A wave of shock spread through the crowd. My father whispered, "Not now, please, not like this." But the announcer continued. We need the person responsible to come forward before things escalate. The room went dead silent. Then dozens of eyes shifted, not at me, but at someone behind me. I turned slowly, pulse racing, dread rising in my chest. The moment hung in the air as everyone stared at the documents scattered across the table, but before anyone could speak, the sound of a car door slamming outside cut through the tension. It was sharp, unexpected, and it made everyone freeze for a second. The wind pushed against the windows, and for a moment the house felt too quiet. You could feel the pressure rising again, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every breath slightly heavier. No one knew who had arrived, and the uncertainty alone shifted the energy in the room. It felt like another storm had just stepped onto the porch. When the footsteps approached the doorway, the family instinctively straightened, each of them silently preparing for another blow. And then, as the door creaked open, a tall man stepped inside, someone none of them expected to see. His presence alone was enough to shake the floor. He looked around slowly, his eyes narrowing as if carefully choosing what to focus on first. It was the uncle they all thought had left the country years ago, the one who disappeared after a nasty family argument. No one had heard from him, and no one even mentioned his name anymore because the situation had been too messy, too painful. But now he was here, standing in the doorway like he had walked in from a completely different timeline. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't even blink. He simply asked one cold question that sliced through the air more sharply than anything else that had been said all day. And that question instantly changed the entire direction of the tension in the room. Everyone exchanged confused looks, struggling to understand how he even knew what was happening, especially since everything that had been unfolding was supposed to be private. But he spoke with the confidence of someone who wasn't just informed, someone who had been watching the situation closely from the shadows. The new twist was unsettling, the kind that pulls the floor from under your feet. As he walked toward the table and picked up one of the papers, you could see how his jaw tightened. He knew more than anyone had expected. And instead of calming the situation, his presence only added another volatile layer. Suddenly the main conflict didn't feel like one story anymore. It felt like a set of tangled threads all tightening at the same time. Every decision, every lie, every hidden detail from the past was being dragged back into the light. The family's expressions shifted from surprise to fear, then to anger. Nothing was stable anymore. Even worse, the newcomer brought news that shifted the stakes entirely. He hinted that someone outside the family was also involved in the drama, someone none of them had considered a threat. It wasn't clear what this person wanted, but the way he spoke made it obvious that the situation was bigger than anyone imagined. The room slowly filled with a quiet panic. No one wanted to admit it, but they all sensed that they were on the edge of something explosive, and this new information had pushed them even closer. Tension spread like smoke. You could feel how it moved from one person to another, increasing with every exchanged look, every unanswered question. Even the silent family members, those who usually kept their opinions to themselves, were now restless, their eyes flicking between the uncle and the papers on the table. The energy felt unstable, like any wrong word could set off a chain reaction. As the argument began to heat up again, he dropped another revelation, one that shifted everyone's assumptions entirely. The twist was sharp and unexpected. It wasn't just about inheritance, loyalty, betrayal, or hidden truths anymore. There was an entire second layer beneath the surface, something that no one had seen coming. A connection from the past. A decision someone made years ago. A secret that only a few people knew, and even they didn't understand the full impact. And now the consequences were standing right in front of them. The room grew heavier, the suspense thickening with every breath. Every storyline, every tension point, every fragment of drama seemed to collide at once. And yet nothing was solved. No one had answers. No one had a clear path out. The stakes were higher than ever, the relationships more fragile, and the sense of danger more real. Everyone was trapped in the moment, waiting for the next revelation, the next confession, the next explosion of emotion. Anything that could either break the conflict wide open or push them deeper into chaos. But before anyone could confront him or question the new twist, he stepped back and gave a slow, unsettling smile, the kind that suggested he had only revealed a fraction of what he knew. And with that single expression, he made it clear that the worst part of the story hadn't come yet. The real chaos was still building, and the climax was only just beginning to take shape. The room stayed silent for a long moment as everyone tried to make sense of the uncle's words. He stood there with a calmness that didn't match the tension around him, and it made everyone more uneasy. The documents on the table, the whispers, the accusations, everything that had been building up for days felt like it had reached its breaking point. Nobody moved, but everyone's heart was pounding. It was clear the truth couldn't be pushed aside anymore. It had to come out, no matter how painful it would be. Finally, you stepped forward and demanded that he explain everything. Your voice shook, not with fear but with exhaustion. You were done with secrets, done with the confusion that had turned your life upside down. The uncle glanced at the others, then at you, and slowly nodded. It seemed like even he understood that hiding anything else would only deepen the damage. So he took a breath and began telling the story he had kept buried for years. He explained that the reason he returned wasn't by chance. He had come back because he discovered something alarming. Someone inside the family had been secretly working with the outsider he mentioned earlier. Someone had been feeding information, twisting stories, and pushing conflicts from behind the scenes for their own benefit. And that person wasn't who anyone suspected. As he spoke, everyone exchanged nervous glances, each silently wondering if they were the one being accused. Then he revealed the truth in a calm but sharp tone that cut through the entire room. The betrayal wasn't from the cousin causing trouble or the aunt who always stirred drama. It was from the quietest person in the family, the one who always stayed in the background and acted innocent. The twist shocked everyone because that person had never raised their voice, never argued, never acted suspicious. But behind closed doors, they had been manipulating the situation for months, hoping to gain control of everything once the rest of the family broke apart. The reaction was instant. Voices rose, emotions clashed, and the quiet family member finally broke down, admitting everything. They confessed they were jealous, tired of being ignored, tired of watching everyone else get opportunities while they felt invisible. They didn't expect things to explode the way they did. They only meant to tilt things slightly in their favor, not destroy relationships. But once the lies started, everything spiraled too quickly to stop. Hearing this truth brought the family to a point where they couldn't avoid the final confrontation anymore. Years of tension, misunderstandings, and unspoken pain came pouring out. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. Every emotion that had been trapped finally surfaced, and for the first time, people began to understand one another instead of attacking blindly. The room felt like it had cracked open, letting in all the honesty that had been missing for too long. When the confession settled, you took a breath and made the first move toward resolution. You reminded everyone that the family had already suffered enough damage. If they kept fighting, they would only keep repeating the same cycle. Slowly, one by one, they began to agree. Apologies were exchanged, not perfect, not polished, but sincere. The weight that had been pressing on everyone seemed to lift as people finally let go of their pride and spoke from the heart. Just when it seemed like everything was settling and the worst was behind you, the uncle dropped one last twist, the part he had kept until the very end. He revealed that the outsider involved in the mess was actually someone connected to the family years ago, someone who had once been trusted but quietly disappeared after a business disagreement. They had returned not to destroy the family but to reclaim something they believed had been taken from them. And the uncle had been negotiating with them privately to prevent them from taking legal action. The room froze again, but this time the tension didn't explode. Instead, everyone processed the truth more calmly. The uncle went on to say that the outsider had agreed to step back after learning the full situation, especially after seeing how broken the family had become. They didn't want revenge anymore, they wanted closure. What they truly wanted had been resolved behind the scenes. With this final truth revealed, everything finally made sense. The confusion, the strange timing, the unexpected appearances, it all clicked together. The family wasn't perfect now, but they were no longer lost in the dark. They had faced the worst parts of their story and survived it. They still had a long way to go, but the path ahead felt clearer than it had in a long time. And as you stood there watching everyone breathe easier for the first time in days, you felt something shift inside you too. The past couldn't be changed, the mistakes couldn't be erased, but the future didn't have to repeat the same patterns. The climax had been painful, intense, and full of surprises, but it left you with something unexpected. Hope that things could finally be different. When the last wave of tension settled in the room, everyone stood there quietly, almost unsure of what came next. It felt strange, like the world had finally stopped shaking after years of silent storms. No one was yelling anymore. No one was pointing fingers or dragging up old memories as weapons. Instead, there was this slow, gentle shift in the air, something softer, something that felt a little like peace. It didn't erase everything that happened, but it gave everyone a chance to breathe again. You looked around at the faces that once watched you fall apart in that bankruptcy hearing so many years ago. Back then, you were nothing but a target, someone they expected to fail and stay down. But standing there now, after unraveling every secret and facing every truth, you felt a deep sense of closure rising inside you. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, just the quiet, steady kind that comes when you finally accept the whole story for what it is. The uncle, who had held the last twist in his hands, sat down slowly and rubbed his forehead as if he had aged 10 years in a single day. You could see guilt in his eyes, but also relief. He started apologizing, not only for hiding things but for letting fear guide him instead of honesty. For years, he had tried to protect everyone by keeping things quiet, not realizing that silence can sometimes be more damaging than the truth. His apology wasn't polished, but it was honest, and it was enough. The relative who had caused the internal betrayal finally spoke again. Their voice was weak, shaky, almost childlike. They admitted they never wanted things to explode the way they did. They had felt invisible for so long that they thought creating chaos would force people to notice them. They cried, not because they were caught but because they finally understood what they had almost destroyed. You watched as others approached them, not with anger now, but with a sense of painful empathy. It didn't excuse what they did, but it showed how deeply everyone needed healing. Slowly, the conversation shifted from blame to understanding. One by one, family members shared their sides of old stories, their fears, their resentments, and the pressure they'd been carrying for years. It was messy, raw, and emotional, but it was real. For the first time, everyone was talking like actual human beings, not enemies, not competitors, not silent strangers under the same last name. It felt like the beginning of something healthier. You found yourself stepping outside for fresh air after the long emotional storm inside. The sky had the kind of orange glow that makes everything feel like it's settling into its right place. You leaned against the railing and let out a long breath. You remembered standing outside the courthouse 15 years ago, clutching your bankruptcy papers, feeling like the whole world had collapsed. You remembered how small you felt watching your own family stare at you like entertainment. Back then you promised yourself that if you ever rose again, you'd rise on your own terms. And you did. Now, watching the sunset and hearing faint voices inside slowly finding common ground, you realized something important. This moment wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It wasn't about revenge, success, or showing off how much you'd rebuilt. It was about letting go. It was about ending a cycle that had been quietly hurting everyone for generations. It was about stepping into a new chapter without carrying the weight of old wounds. When you walked back inside, your family members were gathered around the table, not arguing, not judging, just talking. They cleared a space for you, and for the first time in a long time, you didn't feel like an outsider. Someone handed you a glass of water, another asked if you were okay. Small gestures but meaningful. The kind of gestures that once seemed impossible. You spoke to them honestly about your own journey. You told them how the bankruptcy had nearly crushed you, how starting over felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. You explained the years of rebuilding, the sacrifices, the doubts, the quiet victories, and the strength it took to keep going even when you had no support. They listened, really listened, something they hadn't done before. Some apologized for not being there. Others admitted they were afraid you'd surpass them or make them look bad, something they never wanted to confess until now. You didn't hold grudges anymore. You didn't need to. The person you were back then didn't exist now, and the person you had become wasn't shaped by bitterness but by resilience. You realized this was your moment to finally close a chapter that had haunted you for years. As the evening went on, people started discussing how to rebuild trust. Someone suggested having regular family meetings, not the formal kind but the kind where everyone actually checks in. Someone else proposed sorting out finances transparently to avoid future misunderstandings. Even the idea of group therapy came up, which surprised everyone, but no one laughed or dismissed it. They were finally ready to repair the mess together. Later, when everyone began to head home, your uncle walked up to you and placed a hand on your shoulder. He told you he was proud of who you had become, proud that you didn't let the past define you. It wasn't a dramatic movie-like moment, but it hit you deeply. You nodded, not needing more words. On your way out, you turned around and looked at them one last time. Your entire family, the same people who once watched you fail, now standing together with the first spark of unity you'd seen in years. Something inside you softened. The story had finally come full circle. 15 years ago they showed up to witness your downfall. Now you showed up, not for revenge, not for validation, but for closure. And in the end, that closure became the turning point for everyone. Sometimes life doesn't give you perfect endings, but it gives you the chance to create new beginnings. And as you walked toward your car, feeling lighter than you had in years, you realized that was enough. The past was over. The wounds had been aired. The truth had been spoken. And the future, finally, belonged to all of you.